Let me tell you something. This moment didn't happen by accident. Something brought you here. Maybe exhaustion, maybe frustration, maybe that quiet voice inside you that keeps whispering, "There's more than this. You were built for more." I know that voice. I heard it for years inside myself. When I started Walmart, nobody believed in me. "You can't build a big store in a small town," they said. Banks turned me down. Partners walked away. Experts laughed. But that voice never stopped. It just kept saying, "Try, learn, keep going." I was never the smartest man in the room, not even close, but I did one thing consistently, every single day. I made a decision that I refused to be the same man I was yesterday. That's it. That's the whole secret. Not talent, not luck, not connections, decision. Every morning, I told myself, today I will learn one thing. Today I will take one step. One step sounds small, I know, but one step every day for a year is 365 steps forward, and 365 steps forward turns you into a completely different man. Henry Ford said it best, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." Because whatever you repeat to your mind believes. And whatever your mind believes, your body acts on. And whatever you act on consistently, that becomes your life. So the real question isn't whether you're capable. The real question is, what are you repeating to yourself every day? That voice inside you, the one that's tired of waiting, tired of shrinking, tired of watching others build what you know you could build. That voice is not a fantasy. It's a signal. It's the most honest thing about you. I built an empire, not because I was fearless. I was terrified, plenty of times. I built it because I learned to trust that signal more than I trusted my doubts, more than I trusted the people who said it couldn't be done, more than I trusted the comfort of staying still. You see, most people treat their doubts like facts and their dreams like fantasies. I did the opposite. The men I studied, Carnegie, Lincoln, Edison, none of them started with advantages. What they started with was a decision, a quiet, firm, unshakable decision that they would not die with their potential still locked inside them. That decision changed everything, not overnight, never overnight, but day by day, word by word, step by step, they rebuilt the language inside their own minds. They replaced "I can't" with "How can I?" They replaced "I'm not ready" with "I'll get ready by doing." They replaced fear with forward motion. And the world, which had laughed at them, eventually had no choice but to make room for them. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Not to me, to yourself. How long have you been waiting? How long have you been telling yourself soon, knowing deep down that soon never comes unless you force it to? How many mornings have you woken up and felt that gap, that distance between who you are and who you know you could be, and then buried it under the routine of the day? I'm not asking to make you feel guilty. I'm asking because I know that gap. I lived with it, and I know that the longer you ignore it, the heavier it gets. But here's what I also know. That gap is not evidence of your failure. That gap is the blueprint of your future. The distance between who you are and who you're meant to be. That's not a wound. That's a direction. When I started out, I had nothing but a small store in Newport, Arkansas, and a belief that refused to die. No grand strategy, no investors, no guarantee of anything. What I had was this. I showed up every single day and asked, what can I do better today than I did yesterday? That question, repeated daily, acted on daily, compounded into something the world had never seen before. Not because I was special, but because I was consistent. Consistency is the most underrated force in the world. Everyone wants the breakthrough moment, the single speech, the one idea, the lucky break. And yes, those moments exist, but they only come to the man who has already been showing up long before anyone was watching. The harvest always follows the planting, always. But most men never plant because they're waiting to feel certain before they begin. Here's the truth no one tells you. Certainty is not something you find before you start. It's something you build by starting. I want you to think about the version of yourself that you know exists, not the version the world sees right now, not the version that's tired, that doubts, that holds back. The other one, the one who doesn't flinch, the one who makes the call, takes the risk, builds the thing, leads the people. The one who looks back at hard moments not with regret, but with gratitude, because those hard moments were the making of him. That version is not a stranger to you. You've felt him. In flashes, in moments of clarity, in those rare hours when something clicks and you think, yes, this is who I actually am. He's not a fantasy. He's the most real version of you that exists, and the only thing standing between you and that man is not circumstance, not timing, not resources. It is only this, the decision you haven't made yet. So let me ask you something. I once asked every person who walked into one of my stores wanting to learn the business. What are you waiting for? Not what are you planning? Not what are you hoping? Not what are you considering when the timing feels right and the conditions look perfect? What are you waiting for? Because I'll tell you what I learned after decades of building. The conditions never feel perfect. The timing is never obvious. The guarantee never comes before the risk. It comes after, long after, when you've already bled for it. The men who built the greatest things in history didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for certainty. They didn't stand at the edge asking whether the water was warm enough. They jumped, and they figured out how to swim on the way down. This is where identity begins, where hesitation ends. Charles Schwab, the man Andrew Carnegie trusted to lead an empire, wasn't the most brilliant man in the room. He didn't have the most degrees. What he had was this. When others paused, he moved. When others debated, he decided. When others waited to feel ready, he was already 3 steps forward. And because of that, just that, he became indispensable. Not talent, not luck, movement. Every time you move before you feel ready, you send a message to your own mind. I am the kind of man who acts. Repeat that message enough times through action, not words. And your mind stops questioning it. It accepts it as fact. And once your mind accepts something as fact, it begins building your entire life around it. That is not inspiration. That is mechanics. That is how the human mind actually works. Ford knew this. When his engineers told him it was impossible to cast an 8-cylinder engine in a single block, he said, "Build it anyway." They came back with failure. He said, "Build it anyway." Not stubbornness, decision. He had already written the end of the story in his mind. He was simply walking his way there, one failed attempt at a time. Edison understood the same thing. 10,000 experiments that didn't work. And he never called them failures. He called them data, because he had already decided the outcome wasn't in question, only the path. That's the difference between the men who build and the men who wish. The men who build decide first. Then they discover how. The men who wish wait to discover how first. And they wait, and they wait, and they die waiting. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I won't insult you like that. Building anything real, a business, a character, a life worth looking back on, it costs something. It costs comfort. It costs approval. It costs the version of you that would rather stay safe and small and certain. But here's what I know after everything I've seen and built and lost and rebuilt. The cost of not building is higher. The cost of silencing that voice, of learning to live with the gap between who you are and who you know you could be, that cost compounds every single year. It doesn't get easier to carry. It gets heavier. And one day, if you're not careful, you stop feeling it altogether. That's not peace. That's surrender. You have not surrendered. Not yet. I know that because you're still here. So here is what I want you to do. Not someday, not after this speech, not when you feel motivated enough. Now, make one decision, not 10, not a plan with 17 steps and a vision board and a perfect morning routine. One decision. The decision that you have been delaying. The one that keeps surfacing, no matter how many times you push it down. The one your gut already knows is right, but your fear keeps finding reasons to postpone. Make it now, out loud if you have to. Write it down. Say it to yourself in the mirror. This is the man I am becoming. And I start today, not because everything is in place, not because you have all the answers, but because you have decided. And decision continuing seamlessly is where all power begins. Now, let me tell you something about discipline, because decision without discipline is just a wish with better posture. I've watched 1,000 men get inspired. I've watched them feel the fire, make the declaration, shake hands on the future. And then I've watched most of them drift back. Not because they were weak, not because they didn't mean it, because they confused the feeling of change with the act of it. Inspiration is the spark. Discipline is the fire you build from it every single morning, whether you feel like it or not. When I was building Walmart, there were years, long, grinding, unglamorous years, where nothing felt like momentum, where the competition was closing in and the numbers were tight and the doubters were loud. Nobody was writing articles about me. Nobody was studying my methods. I just kept showing up. Every store, every Saturday morning meeting, every conversation with an associate on the floor, not because I was riding some wave of motivation, because I had built a pattern, and patterns, compounded over years, become empires. That's not poetry, that's math. Andrew Carnegie understood this better than almost anyone I've studied. He didn't rise from a telegraph boy to the richest man in America because fortune smiled on him. He rose because while other men gossiped, he read. While others celebrated average, he studied excellence. While others waited for opportunity to knock, he was already at the door. Discipline had carved him into something the world had no choice but to reward. Charles Schwab was the same. He wasn't the most gifted engineer at Carnegie Steel. He wasn't the most technical mind in the room, but he was the most consistent, the most committed, the most disciplined. He said what he would do, and then he did it, every time, without exception. Do you know how rare that is? A man who keeps his word to himself when no one is watching, that man becomes unshakable, because he's not performing for an audience. He's building an identity, and identity, once built through disciplined action, cannot be taken from you. Let me ask you something honest. If someone followed you for the next 24 hours, not listening to your words, only watching your actions, would they be able to tell what you're building? Would your behavior reveal your purpose? Would your discipline speak for you? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is not shame. It's direction. It's telling you exactly where to start rebuilding. And you rebuild not in grand gestures, not in one dramatic moment of transformation. You rebuild in ritual, in the small, repeated, unglamorous acts that nobody applauds, but that compound into something extraordinary. You wake up before the world gets noisy. You speak your aim aloud. You move before you negotiate with your doubts. You do the hard thing first. You keep the promise you made to yourself yesterday, every single day. Not because it's easy, because it's yours. Abraham Lincoln, a man who carried the weight of a nation fracturing at its seams, did not lead through noise. He led through stillness, through discipline so deep it looked like calm. He wrote when others panicked. He read when others raged. He walked in solitude and returned with clarity. The storm did not move him because he had already built something inside himself that storms could not reach. That is what discipline builds in a man. Not armor, not invincibility, a foundation that holds. So now I want you to understand something about repetition, because this is where most men miss the final step. You can make the decision, you can install the discipline, but if you return to your old language the moment things get hard, if you go back to the old stories, the old doubts, the old voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" then none of it holds, because you are not just what you decide once, you are what you repeat daily. Henry Ford didn't just believe he could build the Model T. He repeated that belief in his mind, in his speech, in his environment, until his entire nervous system was organized around it, until doubt had no frequency left to broadcast on. Edison didn't survive 10,000 failures on willpower. He survived them because he had repeated one belief so many times it had become bone deep. This will work. So every failure was just information, data. Another step walked toward a destination he had already decided was certain. That's the difference between the men who endure and the men who quit. Not strength, not talent. What they repeated when things got hard. So here is what I want you to repeat. Not once, not when you feel like it. Every morning, every night, every time the old voice tries to reclaim its territory. I am not ruled by my feelings, I am ruled by my decisions. I do not drift. I do not delay. I do not shrink. My discipline is my identity. My repetition is my power. And I do not stop. Say it until it stops feeling like words and starts feeling like truth. Say it until the man in the mirror starts to look different. Say it until fear stops finding a foothold, because a mind filled with repeated purpose gives fear nowhere to land. And now I want to talk to you about the one force that makes all of this permanent, the one thing that transforms decision into destiny, discipline into legacy, repetition into something that outlasts you. Purpose, not ambition, not the desire for money or applause or status, though those may come. I'm talking about something deeper, something that doesn't flinch when the money is slow, and the critics are loud, and the road stretches further than you can see. Carnegie told me something once that I never forgot. A man without a mission is a man already defeated. I didn't fully understand it the first time I heard it, but I've carried it for decades, because the more I've lived, the more I've seen how true it is. Fear only survives where there is no clear aim. When a man has no central mission, he is easily shaken by opinion, by setback, by the first sign of difficulty. But when purpose runs deep in a man, when he knows why he is building and who he is building it for, fear becomes irrelevant. Not conquered, not destroyed, just irrelevant. Too small to matter next to something that matters so much. Continuing seamlessly. Carnegie's purpose was so strong that setbacks became side notes. Market crashes, political opposition, public doubt, none of it could shake him, because he wasn't reacting to life. He was building it. And that is the difference I want you to feel right now, not just understand, but feel in your chest, in your spine, in the way you're sitting as you hear these words. The average man changes direction every week. One day he wants greatness, the next he wants comfort. 1 month he's hungry, the next he's distracted. And then he stands in the mirror wondering why fear keeps finding him. It finds him because he gives it a moving target. Purpose removes the target entirely. When Edison decided his mission was to harness electricity and bring light to the world, he didn't just choose a goal, he chose an anchor, something so fixed, so immovable, that 10,000 failures couldn't pull him from it. Each failure wasn't a reason to stop. It was simply another step walked, another piece of data, another morning closer to the thing he had already decided was inevitable. Let me ask you plainly, what are you willing to fail at 10,000 times? Because unless your mission runs that deep, fear will win. Not because fear is strong, but because your reason to move forward isn't stronger. I built Walmart store by store, town by town, year by year. And I'll tell you the truth, the money was never what kept me going through the hard years. What kept me going was simpler than that. I believed that ordinary people deserved the same quality of life as wealthy ones. I believed that a family in a small Arkansas town deserved fair prices and good products just as much as anyone on Fifth Avenue in New York. That belief, that purpose, made every obstacle feel like a test I was meant to pass rather than a wall I was meant to stop at. Purpose doesn't remove the obstacles, it reframes them. It turns resistance into confirmation. It turns difficulty into evidence that what you're building actually matters. Because nothing worth building comes easy, and if it came easy, someone would have already built it. Lincoln didn't govern during peacetime. He didn't lead during ease. He led a nation fracturing at its seams, through war, through death, through a darkness that would have broken a man without a mission. And he did not waver, not because he was fearless. He grieved deeply. He doubted privately. He carried more weight than any man should carry alone. But his purpose was larger than his fear. His aim was clearer than his doubt, and so he moved. He wrote. He decided. He acted, not when he felt strong enough, but because the mission demanded it. That is the mind of a man possessed by purpose. And now I want you to find yours, not a vague dream, not a general direction, one sentence, one aim, one mission so clear and so burning that it becomes the lens through which you see every morning, every choice, every step forward, and every setback. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Repeat it until it stops being something you remember and becomes something you are. When Schwab stood up to speak in front of the most powerful men in American industry, the speech that Carnegie later called the single most effective presentation he had ever witnessed, he didn't succeed because his words were perfect. He succeeded because every word came from purpose. He wasn't performing. He wasn't hoping. He was declaring something he already knew to be true, and the room felt it. That is what purpose does to a man's presence. It removes the apology from his voice. It removes the hesitation from his posture. It makes him walk into a room differently because he isn't searching for anything anymore. He already knows why he's there. That is what I want for you. Not just success, but that certainty. That unshakable fear-proof clarity that comes when a man stops drifting and starts building towards something that genuinely matters to him. So say this now, out loud, with your full voice. My life is governed by purpose. My energy is directed. My actions are aligned. I do not drift. I do not delay. I live with mission. And then say it again tomorrow morning and the morning after that. Not because repetition is magical, because repetition is how the subconscious mind receives its instructions. The mind does not respond to what it hears once. It responds to what it hears repeatedly, spoken with conviction, backed by action. Carnegie repeated his chief aim every single morning. Ford fed his mind certainty not once, but constantly, relentlessly, without apology. Edison rehearsed beliefs so deeply that failure couldn't find a foothold. This is not mysticism. This is the mechanics of how great men were built, from the inside out, through daily repetition of the identity they had chosen to become. And now we arrive at the edge of who you have been and who you are about to become. The man who began this speech, tired perhaps, heavy perhaps, carrying doubt and delay and the quiet ache of knowing he is capable of more than he has shown, that man has heard enough truth today that he cannot fully go back. You've seen too much now. You know that readiness is a decision, not a feeling. You know that discipline is the only freedom worth having. You know that repetition rewires the mind. You know that purpose makes fear irrelevant. You cannot unhear that. And so the man who finishes this speech is already different from the one who began it. Not because inspiration washed over him, but because truth has a weight to it. And truth, once felt, changes the way a man walks. But I have to tell you something before we finish, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, not as a warning, but as the most important instruction in everything I've said today. This speech is not the transformation. Your return to it is. The men I've studied didn't change because they heard a great idea once. They changed because they came back to it again and again. On the mornings when they didn't feel like it, On the nights when doubt crept back in, on the days when the old identity tried to reclaim its territory, they came back, and they repeated, and they rebuilt every single day. Carnegie rehearsed his mission every morning without exception. Ford reinforced his belief constantly, not because he was weak, but because he understood that the mind, left unattended, drifts back toward its oldest patterns. You must do the same. Return to this speech when you rise. Return to it before you sleep. Speak these words until they stop being something you hear and become something you think automatically, until the voice in this speech becomes indistinguishable from your own inner voice. Because that is the moment everything changes permanently, not when you first decide. When you have decided so many times, so consistently, that there is no longer a version of you that considers the alternative. You were not meant to crawl through life. You were not meant to drift from year to year, carrying the weight of unused potential and silenced dreams. You were not meant to break under pressure, shrink in uncertainty, or apologize for the fire that has always burned in you. You were meant to build, to lead, to rise. And that man, the one who builds, who leads, who rises, he is not waiting somewhere in your future. He is here, right now, in every decision you make from this moment forward. In every morning you choose movement over comfort. In every time you return to these words when the world gets loud and doubt gets heavy. He is the man you become through repetition. So I'll leave you with this. The same thing I told every young person who ever asked me how I built what I built. Speak less, move more, return to your purpose daily. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait for the storm to pass. Don't wait for someone to hand you permission to become who you already know you are. You have decided, and what is decided in faith becomes real in time. Now go, and come back tomorrow, and the day after, until discipline is effortless. Until fear no longer recognizes you, until the man in the mirror looks exactly like the man you decided to become on the day you stopped waiting and started walking. That day is today. Sam Walton.